They called her the Silent Girl. It was a name whispered in school hallways, in staff meetings, even among neighbors who only caught glimpses of her from a distance. Emily Hayes, daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, was a mystery wrapped in silence. At 7 years old, she had never spoken a single word. Not a cry, not a laugh, not even the smallest syllable. Doctors had examined her thoroughly. Specialists had poked and prodded, run tests, checked every nerve, every muscle. The results were always the same. There was nothing wrong with her physically. She could speak, but she would not. That was the torment of her father, Daniel Hayes. Daniel was a man used to controlling outcomes. Blind since his 20s, he had built his empire on sheer willpower, intellect, and discipline. He was called ruthless in boardrooms, relentless in negotiations, and revered in the financial world. Competitors feared him. Investors trusted him. He navigated contracts worth millions without ever needing to see the fine print. Yet in the solitude of his mansion, when the office lights were turned off and the world's applause faded into silence, he carried the greatest failure of his life, a daughter who had never called him father. Every morning began the same way. Daniel's driver would lead him into the glass building, where his empire pulsed. He would walk with his cane tapping firmly against the marble floor, his head high, his movements precise. Behind him, usually clutching her teddy bear, so tightly her knuckles turned white, followed Emily. Employees often glanced at her with sympathy. She was tiny, her golden hair falling in soft waves around her pale face, her eyes wide like pools of blue searching for something no one could see. She rarely looked at people directly. Instead, her gaze hovered somewhere between curiosity and fear. Teachers had tried every method: flashcards, music, therapy, animals, sign language. Nothing worked. Some whispered that she simply didn't want to speak. Others feared something deeper was locked inside her. Daniel, for all his strength, could do nothing but hope. Each night he sat beside her bed, his large, rough hand gently resting over hers, and whispered stories he made up on the spot. Tales of brave girls who saved kingdoms, of explorers who found hidden treasures, of children who discovered their voices and shook the world. He spoke to her, always waiting, always listening for a reply that never came. Sometimes he thought he heard her lips part, but it was always just silence. Then one morning, an unexpected presence entered their lives. The company had hired a new janitor, a man who introduced himself simply as Jacob. He wasn't like the others who came and went, treating the job as temporary or beneath them. Jacob carried himself with a quiet dignity, a calm steadiness that made people pause. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair slightly unkempt and eyes that carried a story behind them. Though he pushed a mop and carried cleaning supplies, there was something about him that didn't quite fit the role. He was polite, respectful, and he never looked down on anyone, whether it was the CEO or the intern. People soon learned Jacob was a single father. Sometimes his little daughter, Lily, came to the building after school, waiting for him to finish his shift. She was about Emily's age, a lively girl with freckles and a gap-toothed smile that seemed to brighten every room she entered. Unlike many children, she wasn't intimidated by the CEO's cold reputation or by Emily's silence. When she first saw Emily sitting quietly with her teddy bear in the lobby, she walked straight over, plopped down beside her, and started chatting as if they had been friends forever. That day was like any other at first. Daniel had just finished a tense meeting with his board of directors. He stood in the lobby, his hand resting on his cane, waiting for his driver to bring the car around. Emily sat on one of the leather chairs, swinging her legs slightly, her teddy bear pressed to her chest. She never strayed far from her father, always orbiting around him like a small, fragile satellite. Lily came running in, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Daddy, I'm here," she called out, her voice echoing cheerfully through the polished lobby. She skipped past executives in expensive suits, waved at the receptionist, and made a beeline for her father, who was wiping down a glass wall. Jacob smiled softly at her, his hand pausing mid-swipe as his daughter hugged him tightly. "Hey, kiddo," he said warmly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Then Lily noticed Emily. She tilted her head, curious, and without hesitation she walked over. Daniel, hearing her footsteps, turned slightly in her direction, his blind eyes fixed but unseeing. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted as employees pretended not to watch, but curiosity tugged at them. "Hi," Lily said brightly, plopping down on the chair next to Emily. "I like your teddy bear. What's his name?" Emily blinked at her, startled. She looked down at the bear, then back at Lily. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She clutched the bear tighter, almost as if to hide behind it. Lily didn't seem to mind. She leaned closer, her freckles dancing as she grinned. "I have one too. His name is Mr. Buttons. He's missing an ear, but he's still the best. Does yours have a secret name?" Emily's chest rose and fell quickly. She looked away, her silence heavy and awkward. Jacob, noticing the tension, knelt down beside them. His presence was calm, not pushy, not demanding. He looked at Emily gently, his voice steady, low, and filled with warmth. "It's okay, Emily. You don't need to talk," he said softly. "Not until you're ready. But when you are, just remember, the world is waiting to hear you." The words hung in the air like a key sliding into a hidden lock. Daniel, standing only a few feet away, stiffened. His head turned slightly, his ears catching every syllable. Emily's eyes widened. For a moment, her face crumpled as though a flood of feelings had been unlocked. Her lips trembled. The teddy bear slipped from her arms and fell to the floor with a soft thud. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in her 7 years of life, a sound escaped. It was small, broken, like the fragile notes of a bird testing its wings. Daniel's cane slipped from his hand. The blind man's fingers shook as he reached out into the empty air, desperate to confirm what he had just heard. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Secretaries held their breath, executives forgot their meetings. Even the receptionist's phone stopped ringing. Jacob's daughter leaned forward eagerly, whispering, "What did you say?" Emily's voice was barely audible, but it was there, real, alive. A sound her father had prayed for, begged for, dreamed of in his loneliest nights. And in that moment, everything changed. The silence in the lobby seemed to press against the walls, as if the building itself had been holding its breath. For 7 years, not a single word had left Emily's lips, and now, all at once, the air quivered with something fragile and impossible. Jacob froze where he was crouched, his hand resting on his knee, his gaze fixed gently on the little girl who stared back at him with trembling lips. His daughter, Lily, leaned forward with wide eyes, her freckles dancing as her mouth formed a delighted "Oh." Daniel Hayes, the blind CEO who commanded empires without sight, had dropped his cane. It clattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. He didn't even bend to pick it up. His hands hovered in front of him, as if the universe itself might place the truth into his palms. He had lived for this moment, prayed through long nights, whispered stories in the dark beside his daughter's bed. He had imagined her voice 1,000 times, but imagination was nothing compared to this faint, trembling sound that now slipped past her lips. Emily's teddy bear lay abandoned on the floor, its button eyes staring up at the ceiling. She pressed her small hands against the edge of the leather chair, her knuckles pale, and her mouth opened again. The word was no louder than a sigh, no stronger than the flutter of a moth's wings, but Daniel heard it clear as thunder. "Daddy." The single word shattered the weight of years. Daniel's face contorted, 1,000 unspoken emotions crashing through him at once. His blind eyes, always calm and controlled, now glistened as tears he hadn't felt coming slid down his cheeks. His throat tightened painfully, and his mouth opened. But no sound came. This man, who had argued down billionaires, who had ordered entire companies to bend to his will, was suddenly stripped of all language. For once, words abandoned him. The employees around the lobby couldn't believe what they had heard. Some gasped audibly. Others pressed their hands against their mouths. A secretary, who had worked in the building for 6 years, whispered to a colleague. She spoke. I swear she spoke. The receptionist clutched the edge of her desk, trembling. No one dared move. No one dared break the spell. Emily's chest rose and fell rapidly, as though her small body was overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had just done. She stared at Jacob, not her father, with eyes wide and searching. Slowly, carefully, she slid down from the chair, her little shoes tapping softly against the floor. The room's silence magnified every sound, each step she took. Instead of running to Daniel, she walked toward Jacob, her gaze locked on him as though he had unlocked something deep inside her. She reached him, her hand clutching at his sleeve, tugging lightly. Her lips trembled again, and she whispered, "Say it again." Jacob felt his throat tighten. The whole world seemed to lean in, waiting, listening, expecting. He lowered himself fully onto one knee, so he could meet her at eye level. His voice came out soft, steady, gentle. "The world is waiting to hear you." Emily's lips curved into something Daniel had never seen on her face before. A smile. Not the faint curve of amusement, not the polite imitation of happiness, but a true, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. It was the smile of a child discovering a hidden door inside herself and stepping through it. Her small voice came again, still shaky but stronger now. "Waiting." The words seemed to ripple outward like a stone dropped in still water. Lily clapped her hands together with joy.
"She said another one."
"Daddy, she said another one?" Daniel staggered forward, his hands searching the air until he felt the edge of the chair his daughter had just left. His knees nearly buckled as he lowered himself, reaching out blindly until his hand brushed against her shoulder. Emily didn't flinch this time. Instead, she turned and pressed herself into his arms. Daniel held her, as though she were the most precious thing in the world, his tears soaking into her hair. "My Emily." His voice cracked, broken in a way no one in the building had ever heard. "You spoke to me. You called me Daddy." She buried her face in his chest, her small hands gripping his jacket tightly. She didn't reply, but the sound she had already given him was enough to burn into his soul forever. In the days that followed, the entire company buzzed with the miracle that had unfolded in the lobby. Word spread quickly. Too quickly for Daniel's taste. He had always guarded his private life fiercely, but this was different. This was hope. Emily had spoken, and even if it was only a handful of words, it was the beginning of something no one had believed possible. Yet there was something curious, something both beautiful and painful. Emily's words came, but they came sparingly, carefully, and only to certain people. She whispered short words to Lily, sometimes to Jacob, and occasionally to her father when she felt brave enough. To teachers, doctors, and therapists, she remained silent. She clammed up the moment a stranger leaned in expectantly. No coaxing, no toys. No promises could pull her voice from her again. It left Daniel both grateful and unsettled. He was grateful beyond measure that his daughter had found her voice, but why had it been Jacob, the janitor, a stranger, that had sparked it? For years he had done everything a father could. And yet it was another man's words that broke through. Daniel couldn't help the flicker of insecurity in his chest. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights flickered, Outside the massive glass windows, Daniel sat in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Emily played quietly with Lily in the corner of the office, their laughter soft but real. He turned his blind eyes toward the sound of the mop moving across the floor. "Jacob," Daniel said finally, his voice deep, carrying the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed. "Come here." Jacob set the mop aside and approached. He stood tall, his posture respectful but calm. "Yes, sir." Daniel turned his face toward the sound of his voice. "You've done something I could not. You got my daughter to speak. I need to understand how." Jacob hesitated. This was not a question that could be answered with a simple explanation. He glanced at the girls, who were giggling over a game they had invented, and lowered his voice. "My daughter Lily stopped speaking once too." Daniel's head tilted slightly, his brows furrowing. 3 years ago," Jacob continued, "after her mother died, she didn't speak for almost a year. I tried everything, doctors, therapy, begging, pleading. Nothing worked. Then one night, I stopped pushing. I just told her, 'You don't have to talk until you're ready. But when you are, the world will be waiting to hear you.' The next morning, she whispered her first word again. 'That's all I did, Mr. Hayes.' I gave her permission not to be perfect, not to perform, not to meet anyone else's expectations. I gave her space." Daniel was silent for a long moment. His throat tightened with emotions he couldn't name. He leaned back in his chair, his blind eyes glistening, and whispered almost to himself, "Space. All these years, I've been trying to pull her out. I never thought of letting her come on her own." Jacob lowered his gaze respectfully. "You love her, sir. That's clear. But sometimes love presses too hard. Sometimes what a child needs most is patience." Daniel's fingers curled against the arms of his chair. For once in his life, he had no counterargument, no strategy, no way to outthink the truth laid before him. He only had the fragile sound of his daughter's voice, replaying in his mind, her tiny whisper calling him daddy, and though he was grateful beyond measure, something deeper stirred in him. A fear, quiet but persistent. He feared losing his place as the most important figure in his daughter's life. Feared that she would run to Jacob for comfort instead of to him. For a man who had built his world on control, this was the most terrifying thought of all. Yet, when Emily looked up from her game, her eyes bright, her lips trembling with another small word meant only for him, all of those fears melted. In that moment, he knew that no matter what path had led them here, her voice was the greatest gift he had ever been given. One evening the office was unusually quiet. Most of the staff had already gone home, leaving only the faint hum of cleaning equipment in distant corridors and the soft tapping of the city outside the tall windows. Daniel Hayes sat behind his desk, his posture stiff, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. He had called Jacob into his office. Not as an employer calling a janitor, not as a CEO summoning staff, but as a father wrestling with questions he couldn't answer. He heard the door open and close quietly, the shuffle of steady footsteps crossing the carpet. Jacob's steps always carried a kind of calm weight, never rushed, never loud, almost as if he respected the very floor he walked on. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his blind eyes facing the sound. "Sit," he said, his voice deep but lacking its usual iron. Jacob pulled out a chair and sat without protest. There was a pause, long enough that the faint ticking of Daniel's desk clock seemed to echo. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "You've done something I could not," he said slowly. "For 7 years, I tried everything. Doctors, therapists, tutors. Nothing worked. My daughter never spoke to me. But the first time you spoke to her, she did. I want to know why." Jacob let out a slow breath. His hands rested on his knees, his eyes lowering as he gathered his thoughts. "It wasn't me," he said softly. It was her. She chose the moment. She chose the words. I only gave her permission. Daniel's brows furrowed. Permission. When my wife died 3 years ago, Jacob began, his voice carrying a heaviness that instantly filled the room. My daughter, Lily, was 6. The day we buried her mother, Lily stopped speaking. Just stopped. For almost a year she didn't say a word. Not to me, not to anyone. Doctors said the same things yours said about Emily. Nothing was wrong with her. But she had locked herself in silence, and I couldn't reach her. He paused, his throat tightening. I begged, I bribed, I even cried in front of her. Nothing worked. Then one night, I just sat beside her and told her, you don't have to talk until you're ready. But when you are, the world will be waiting to hear you. And the next morning, her first word came back. It was small, but it was everything. It wasn't me who fixed her. It was her who decided she was safe enough to come back. Daniel sat in silence. His hands, always steady during boardroom battles, trembled slightly on the desk. The truth of Jacob's words hit him harder than any hostile takeover or failed investment ever had. He realized then that perhaps he had been pressing too hard, pushing his daughter to speak instead of allowing her to arrive at her own pace. He had tried to pull her voice out when all she had needed was to be given space. You gave my daughter what I could not. Daniel whispered, his voice breaking in a way that startled even him. Patience. Jacob nodded. And love, sir. The kind that doesn't demand anything in return. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his blind eyes turned upward, as if searching the ceiling for answers. He had built an empire with absolute focus. Yet he had missed the simplest truth about his own child. He felt tears threaten again, but he pushed them back, unwilling to break entirely in front of this man. For the first time in years, Daniel reached his hand across the desk, not for a contract, not for a deal, but for another man's hand. Jacob looked at him, surprised, then extended his own, rough from years of work. Their hands met, and Daniel gripped tightly. You've given me something no amount of money could ever buy. Daniel said hoarsely, for that, I will never be able to repay you. Jacob shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything. Just keep loving her. That's enough. In the weeks that followed, Jacob became more than an employee. He became part of something Daniel hadn't even realized he was missing. Family. Emily and Lily grew inseparable. They colored together in Daniel's office, chased each other down the hallways, and whispered secrets only children could understand. Slowly, Emily's voice grew stronger. She started with single words, yes, no, bear, play. Then she moved to small sentences. The sound of her fragile laughter filled spaces that had once been hollow and silent. Daniel lived for those sounds. He memorized every one of them, holding them close like treasures. Sometimes she still chose silence, especially with strangers, but he no longer feared it. He had learned from Jacob that silence was not absence, it was waiting. But gratitude brought